Hello, my name's Carl Niji and I'm what's known as a Davis Dyslexia Facilitator. I'm also the owner-operator of a business called Overcoming Dyslexia in Ottawa, Canada. So today what I'm going to talk about is what I call the paradigm of a learning disability. Now, the reason I want to talk about it is that it comes up in my office just sort of endlessly. It comes up on the phone, it comes up when I talk to people, comes up in any kind of social media forum. And I think many Davis facilitators are working with people who are very much trapped and stuck inside of this, what I think of as a very negative paradigm. And it's negative for a host of different reasons. When we really look at what the word paradigm means, we realize that it's either a narrative or a story that we're being told or that we're telling ourselves. So we have personal paradigms and we have social paradigms, and there is a paradigm, a current paradigm of learning disabilities, which is a narrative and a story that we're being told repeatedly from different sources. Where it really shows up the most is, of course, in the educational. That has like a chunk to that comes at us and we're listening to that. Then there's another part that comes from psychology, which is really medicine and everything involved in science and medicine. But when we look at the medical side of it, it breaks down into psychology, neurology, and pharmacology. So when we look at this paradigm and the message that we're getting from it all the time, it is not a positive message. There are people in it that are positive. The individual teacher or psychologist might have a very good attitude and might have a very good positive sense of how they teach a child, how they approach a child, and how they approach this subject. However, the overwhelming messaging that is sort of given to you piece by piece over the years when you're exploring it for yourself is most definitely a negative. My own experience of it as somebody who's dyslexic was it was like it was being handed to me piece by piece. Particularly as an adult, when I discovered I was dyslexic for the first time, I also got labeled with 5 or 6 other labels at the same time. So I got labeled with dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dysphasia, dyslexia, a certain amount of ADD or ADHD. So there was some hyperactivity involved. And what I realized is, as I began to explore this, that no one was really sitting me down and saying, this is the paradigm, this is what we want you to believe of yourself. However, it was sort of given to me a little bit, it was almost like it was dripped into my ear. So I would, if I was talking to an educator, they would be telling me pieces of information. And if I spoke to somebody in psychology, they would be telling me pieces of information. And the same with any article I read or any book that I read, I was getting these little hints all the time. And because we're discussing what the person can't do, so if we think of it from the point of view of a child, we have a 10-year-old boy or girl who is clearly not doing what we want them to do in school, and they're clearly not reading at grade level. Maybe they've got some focusing issues, they've got handwriting issues, multiple things that could be going on with that child. We start looking at this and saying, well, we think this kid might have a learning disability. I've had people call me with children as young as 5 years old saying, well, I think there's something amiss here. So as we investigate this as parents, what happens is parents start getting these pieces of information or messaging, and they start getting it told different aspects of it depending on what difficulty that child is having. And because we're talking about the things that the person can't do, it's a negative. So the person has difficulty reading or cannot read, difficulty focusing or cannot focus, cannot stay on task, all these difficulties that we can have. So when we really look at this, although the individuals are not to blame, there is no teacher in the school system that we can go and sort of say, well, that person is to blame for all of this problem. And the same with psychology. The psychologists aren't to blame. The neurologists aren't to blame. So we have to remove this idea of blame from it, which is quite difficult to do if you're a parent that has a child with a learning disability and you go to the school and the school system says, well, this is what we do, and it doesn't appear to be working very well for your particular situation. So you go to psychologists and you might have a psych ed assessment and some testing done. That comes back with some recommendations of what to do, which seems very much like what we've already been doing and at the same time seems a little bit different. It's sort of more intensive or less of or more of in some sense. But again, you're given these messages that you can't actually do what we want you to do. We could look at this paradigm from lots of different places. We could look at it and take it apart and deconstruct it, which I'll do in later videos. But when we look at the messaging that's coming from the educational system and really listen to what they have to say, what they're saying is, well, we don't really know what is at the root cause of these learning disabilities. And what we have is largely traditional, and it's largely based on what has worked for people that can read and write. So sort of grade A students, it works for them. It just happens that your child is a non-reader or treatment resistant. Well, those are both negative terms. And traditionally, that's what we've got. And statistically, when we look at it, it doesn't actually deliver what we would like it to deliver on a long enough timeline. If we go to psychology and ask questions there, what we find is a highly technical language with things like auditory processing disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity or hypoactivity disorder. So there's a lot of disorders, and that starts generating worry, anxiety, fear. If we go to neurology and look at what they're saying is, well, we don't really know what's at root cause. The old model was damaged. There was something fundamentally wrong with your brain, and this comes from messaging that's about 100 years old, and some people, I still think, may still believe that idea. The new model is what we call neurologically diverse, or neurological diversity. And this terminology's come around about in the last 10 years of neurodiversity. And that's really saying that there are different types of brains and different types of ways of thinking. But again, what neurology is saying, we still don't really know what is causing this particular disorder. So when we look at this and we come, well, if the neurology doesn't really know, and they're saying that it seems to be difference and not damage, but we really don't know what's causing that difference, then psychology is going to struggle to know. There, in the language of psychology, they start breaking it down and talking about it in many different ways and doing different studies that gives us different percentages on what works and what doesn't work for some people. But again, it's still waiting for neurology to come up with answers. So that means that education is stuck with what has worked for people that can read and write simply and easily. And when we look at the educational system at large, what we realize is it was invented by people who could read and write simply and easily, for people that could read and write simply and easily. I'm going to be looking at this negative paradigm in different ways and talking about different aspects of it in up and coming videos. But why I'm really talking about it now is that it traps people. What happens is a parent that is exposed to this slowly over maybe many years, I don't think anybody really sits them down and says, look, this is the paradigm that you're being exposed to and what is the message that you're getting here. And if we really sort of distilled it down, what would it be saying? It would basically be saying that we don't know what is causing learning disabilities. We don't know whether it's difference or damage. What we have is traditional methods. They seem to work for some people, but statistically they don't seem to work so well for people with learning disabilities. We're also going to refer to you as people with disorders, and that's going to emotionally trigger a lot of emotional angst in you and your child, and you're probably not going to feel very pleasant. And basically that's it. Good luck. And we're really sorry. We're going to be as nice as we can, but and if you're on the end of that message, when you finally realize that as a parent that messaging is happening, it's really going to generate fear. And when it generates fear, what it does for people is we get stuck in this either fight, flight, or freeze mode, or we bounce around and round and round trying to get out, but we can't get out because we either advocate for our child, which is fighting the school system, but the school system doesn't really have answers. We can freeze, which is really just hoping for the best and hoping it's going to be better, which is also fawning, or we can flight. We can sort of run away from it and blame it on to say, oh, they don't know what they're doing, they're stupid, which is not accurate. There are highly skilled, highly intelligent professionals in this area, but what's happening in this negative paradigm is it's not based on root cause. And the reason that we're not getting the help that people with learning disabilities really need, is because all of this negative paradigm is still waiting to discover what is at root cause. So when you really go to the end of neurology and psychology and say, okay, so what's happening there? What people are using in these two groups largely is observational science. So when we do observational science, we look at something and we say, that's this new thing that I didn't know anything about, and what can I find out about it? We gather facts and information, we look at that, we understand those facts and information, and then we act on it. The problem with observational science, I love it, I'm a big fan of it, and I think it's truly amazing. The problem with when it comes to people's minds is that you can only go so far. You're essentially stopped at a certain, you can only go so deep into somebody's mind. And that's a problem. And that's really where the Davis method becomes uniquely different from anything else that's being used. And it's really because where science stops, the observational science in particular stops, this is where Ron Davis takes over and goes deeper down into his own understanding and his own dyslexia and his own autism, still using observational science, but on his own mind, and then looking at what's happening for himself. As a reaction to this negative paradigm that starts very young for children, as young as 5 and 6, what's happened is adults generally have come up with a sort of a reaction to that, which is a positive messaging of dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, etc. And if you go on things like YouTube, which is a great example of this, or Facebook, you will see all kinds of people making videos and clips and interviews with famous dyslexics, famous people with ADD, different skill sets that people have in art and music. And really the creative side of it is the gift side of it, if you like. It's the upside of dyslexia. This is a negative, there's always a positive. To every negative, there is a positive. You could think of it as light and dark. You could think of it as up and down. The trouble with a lot of the positive messaging that's coming is that, again, it's still not based on root cause. So I personally feel that although I've seen some amazing videos and people being really a real sense of hope, it's still not based on root cause. So for me, very often, a lot of these videos that I've seen on the positive side can be undermined by the negative, by people saying, well, there's no real proof that it's a benefit and these sorts of things. And since the vast majority of dyslexics don't experience the sort of the very cream at the very top, or these sort of heroic people. So we might find people that could be real mentors on the positive side, even heroes, famous people throughout history. And even if we look at these people and say, well, that's really amazing what they did, and some of them are still alive, people like Richard Branson and Jamie Oliver, who say, oh, I'm dyslexic. They're usually adults that once they've left school, they find their thing that they're very good at. And if you listen to those famous people, you hear them say, well, school wasn't so great, but once I left school, I found my thing. So I think even the positive side, if we're not careful, it can undermine the success, because we're setting somebody up for a failure here. We're saying, well, look at this amazing person and what did they do? But yet this 10-year-old is failing. So that can also add to this negative side. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't be positive about your dyslexia, don't be positive about the upside. There is a massive upside to dyslexia, and I will do a video later on at the positive side and the positive attributes about dyslexia and other learning disabilities. But when we really look at this positive side, again, what we realize is it's not really talking about root cause. So how can we fully explore it if we don't fully understand it? On this negative side too, because some of this positive can be so positive, it doesn't really turn into toxic positivity, but I do think that it can set someone up for a failure. And I've seen that again and again and again with kids. And that can, of course, on this negative side can get very dark indeed. And it's what I call the dark side of dyslexia. And it's the place that no one really wants to talk about. I know a lot of Davis facilitators don't want to talk about it. A lot of parents don't want to talk about it, because it really is the the truly negative side of and very dark things that begin to happen for kids who really fail throughout the school system. However, what parents need to know is they need to understand that they've been trapped by this negative paradigm, and it eventually, what I think it does, because people bounce around fight, flight and freeze constantly and they can't get out, what it does for everybody involved is it begins to turn people apathetic. And that's really deadly, because the child just sort of gives up. They just believe, I can't do it, I'm stupid, I'm dumb, I'm lazy, and they buy into that kind of idea. Or they just buy into this idea of, I can't. And that's truly sad. I think that happens for parents, I think that happens for teachers, it probably happens for psychologists as well. And most of the people in this negative paradigm that's coming at a person with a learning disability or dyslexia, there are many people that want a solution. There are people that want out of this negative paradigm. So what we really need then is a truly positive paradigm. And what would that look like? What would it be? Well, what it would look like, as far as my own experience, is it would be based on knowing what is at root cause. And when we know what's at root cause, we can deconstruct it and we can put it back together. When we deconstruct it, we can see, oh, Ron's ideas about being disoriented and about dyslexia, when they show up here, we call it dyslexia. When it shows up here, we call it dysgraphia. When it shows up here, we call it dyscalculia. When it shows up here, we call it a learning disability. When it shows up here, we call it ADD. And we just go on with lots of different ways that we can describe this basic problem. And when we realize what Ron is saying, we realize we can put it back together again, because we know what's at root cause, because we have, it's like a foundation stone, if you like. Ron then began to build out from there and built a framework, which are basically the Davis programs. But he didn't stop there. He went on and said, well, how could we introduce this into the school system? How could we get these tools from the basic Davis material that Davis facilitators use? How could educators understand it so they can use it in the classroom? And that's called Davis Young Learners Strategies, or Davis Strategies Young Learners, so DLS, which is Davis Learners Strategies. So we've got strategies that can go into the classroom. It means psychologists could begin to understand it and talk about it differently. But really what it does is it builds a framework that that person who has dyslexia can understand their own dyslexia and basically reduce this negative side down to a very small amount, a manageable amount. Because we can learn to read at grade level, we can learn to focus, we can learn to stay on task, we can learn to do all of these things that this negative paradigm tells us that actually we can't do easily, and we can learn to do it. And what that really does is it allows, more importantly for everybody who's involved here, educators, teachers, parents, psychologists, neurologists, but what it really does for the person that has the problem, the child, the 10-year-old or the adult, is that it allows them really to transcend this negative paradigm and fully explore this positive. It gives us a doorway into understanding the positive. Now, Ron's books, The Gift of Dyslexia, The Gift of Learning, and Autism and the Seeds of Change, give us the basic understanding, but it's only when we actually apply these methods that we can really have an impact. And for the person that actually does a Davis program or really gets involved in Davis, it is far more than a gift. It is really transformative for that person's life, because they can turn this negative paradigm of an I can't into an I can. And that is really profound for the person that does it. So what I would encourage parents who are watching this is to realize that you've been stuck in this negative paradigm. Once you realize you've been stuck in it, you can actually release yourself from it. And that's really the first step, is identifying where you're stuck and then doing something that's based on root cause so you can release yourself from this paradigm. Ultimately, I think the Davis method could go into the school system, it could go into psychology, could go into neurology, and it would really change this paradigm and manifest. It would then manifest as something very different. Anyway, that's the topic for today. Please like, share and subscribe. If you'd like to contact me, you can go to the links below. If you'd like to find the nearest Davis facilitator in your neighborhood, then go to the link below and at the links at the end of this video. Bye for now.